Hello everyone, today we talk about the so-called imposter syndrome, a very common issue that many people undergo and that I experienced myself at some point in my life, especially in situations in which they have essentially taken on responsibility. They have, let's say, a big work to do, often with a deadline, and eventually they have to provide with concrete results or being evaluated about them, and other people rely on them, and there is in fact often a degree of social judgment, right, or appreciation or depreciation on the basis of in fact respectively the success or the failure in this, and that makes the person fundamentally insecure about her adequacy, her fitness, about about themselves, right? Essentially about the capacity of carrying out this task successfully. And I'm talking about this chiefly as far as my doctoral experience is concerned, because as you know, I'm making this series in the playlist PhD Tales that is designed to, to advise, not necessarily to help, hopefully. I'm just telling mostly what happened to me in that context, in a very personal way that can naturally vary dramatically, but that it does turn out is a thing among especially doctoral researchers, because of, first of all, what you're going to get in the end, and what you're there for, which is not to be given for granted, because many people bail out from doctorates more often than not because they are actually kicked out, but because they decide themselves that the thing is not for them. And you find out in many cases that the reason is that they somehow have some moral strain with that. It does seem statistically there is a much higher percentage of depressed people among PhD students. Fortunately, was not my case. Actually, I want to talk about that too, perhaps not in this specific video, but it's important to get kind of the person type before getting to this stuff, because objectively we do live in a weekly society, right, where the individual is somehow ever more comforted in his or own failures and shortcomings. You're usually told like it's not your fault and this things just happen, don't worry, we're all different, and trying to actually relativize many things that in this sense do not help the person reaching their goals, because you basically make them understand that they're not enough, and that you're teaching them to be okay with not having been enough to accomplish a certain thing that, look, in perspective sounds definitely much worse than what you're actually told. So naturally there are lots of people that also know that bail out doctorates for completely different reasons. So this video doesn't mean that this thing that whoever feels pressured by a doctorate, for example, should and bails out should feel bad because of that. There are many people who legitimately are right in it. Maybe they are really not adequate for that type of job, but it's not because they wouldn't be able to succeed in it, right? Or because there is something inherently wrong with them. It's just maybe they discovered they're better at doing something else, and they feel more accomplished doing something else. And this is very often also the case, because I can relate that about the fact that yes, I, for example, succeeded and so on, and as we have seen in also already in some videos in the past, like, first of all, it happened in part because of luck, which must necessarily enter into play if you want to succeed, because as we have already explained in other videos of the series, I'm not going to repeat myself today, but you must take that into account, because failure is there just even for reasons that at different stages of the process that you may not in fact be able to control, because if we did manage to control everything in such complex and kind of previously unexperienced works, we would just do whatever we want, right, and always succeed, and that's not the case. And part of, undertaking such an enterprise, let's say, is exactly to teach you how hard that is, but also in that sense how to cope with hard stuff in that regard. And also the thing, of course, doesn't want to sound like, either like we have just to pretend this thing always happens, or as we will see, most of this imposter syndrome is just it reveals like the always the double threat, the double potential of reality, right? You're never in a situation where you can't simply say, okay, this is going to go well anyhow. There can't be so much, right? And I don't want to increase, of course, the neuroticism of those who maybe just will click on this video to hoping to get some comfort about that. But in a sense, it is the deal, because again, it's about you. It's about what you want and how you think you're gonna accomplish that, which is also another issue, because it doesn't just take, of course, to want the thing, but also to get it done, which are two categorically distinguished things, but also they are radically intertwined. And if not, again, they make part of the whole thing in the end. And today I want rather to talk about properly the syndrome per se. That is to say, why this thing comes about, how it manifests itself, how to deal with it, and how to, of course, move on, and essentially being honest with yourself. Because the imposter syndrome, again, is everywhere. Everybody can relate with that. Even when you're at school and you have an examination or a test or whatever, you perfectly know that sometimes you can succeed without being actually the best, right? Sometimes you can't even cheat, as a matter of fact. Cheating is a serious issue, and I never condone it. I think that actually the best way to cheat is not to cheat, right? The easiest way to get things done is doing them well, and it does cost, right? But at the end of the day, you're going to earn so much in a medium longer term by doing the right way that there is definitely no comparison. You're going to definitely succeed much better and much more often than you think. As we've seen in other videos, a great part of a PhD work stands in the fact that you basically have to handle for years, right, a work that you are, by definition, just because you are supposed to bring something new on the table at the end of this period that nobody has ever written, in fact, is unknown by definition, right? I again made multiple videos and explained that, especially the one about the project, the selection, right? When you begin, it is perfectly normal not to be aware, even not just of what it's going to it would be in the hand, hopefully, but what you're practically going to do the moment you actually pass the selection, which is also an incredibly difficult thing to do per se. And you can immediately feel a bit that kind of imposter syndrome since the beginning in that regard, because like in my case, I passed, but it was just one place for 16 candidates, right? And I know also some of the people who passed there, and knew then who got in the selection, who didn't pass, as a matter of fact, and that are, I think, in some ways, and that's a bit of a mystery to assess, because we cannot fully know how capable a person is. We're not in their brain, right? But that I consider, however, as historians, as better than me. A very few, admittedly. I'm not very modest, but I realize that I'm a very particular type of historian by background, and I do things in very often completely different ways than my much more kind of, in fact, formally orthodox colleagues do. But that doesn't mean that it's actually a negative thing. Actually, in instance, it made me pass, and the thing went on also successfully. But definitely I can't see right out there if, at a conference or at, reading an article or just talking with a person, what they are made of, right? And I have always felt, as a matter of fact, and this may have played a part in the, in my imposter syndrome, to have not been enough, right? To always being somehow a bit less than the others. The imposter syndrome, as I was saying before, starts just like that, right? You wanna do something. You basically don't know how it is, but you still want to do it. And there is this, of course, deep attraction that we all have for the unknown, for the gamble, for risk. This is properly a polemical, if not properly a warlike character. It's in fact more common among males because of testosterone, etc. And you can easily realize that aside from this toxic ideologism revolving about, equal opportunities. Opportunities are fine, right? Equal outcomes are a bit of a problem among sexes. That, of course, I don't know. In my PhD, we were also mostly all males and above 6 feet in height, and it's not even to say that there are more girls than guys at our faculty just per se. I think they're pretty evenly balanced, but obviously, it's not the case in the doctoral population, let's put it like that. So it's obvious that confidence, this kind of, even a properly assertive, even stubborn, even aggressive, ambitious mentality is definitely helpful, right? I don't know, look intimidating. People think that I am somehow a very rigid, stern, cold, square, rational person. But as you can understand from here, even if I, of course, like being, to the point, concrete, direct, and so on, I'm always full of questions, right? I'm even tendentially insecure. Like all my life has been thinking about what people would call overthinking. Like, can I do this? Can't I do this? Because to me, it was always very evident that things have to be done well, otherwise you will fail. And this is not even to say that this created me particular confidence problems, right? Whenever, of course, I was acquainted with a confronted with a difficulty, etc., there is this moment of kind of morale lowering, but then over time you start thinking about how to solve the matter. You realize that all it takes is to actually go there and do the thing, and if you fail, which I must say rarely happened in my life, and mostly in times in which basically I didn't care that much about what I was doing, it was just at best pretending. That's actually the worst thing, right? Because it really tells you that you're desperate. If you need to do something that you don't like, but that you're doing for say somebody else or something else that is just more like a in fact collective conformistic thing to do. I did pass through that thing too, but let's say I've never ceased to rely on myself, right? I've never been somewhere where I needed, for example, somebody else to make the work for me, or to convince myself I was not good enough. At best, there were indicators that things were going bad, and I was objective about that, because I think even a good part of my historical qualities that I always strive to be objective. I mean, I'm not a perfectionist, as you know. I like to do things well, but I'm also lazy. Like I make an enormous effort every time. I really like what I'm doing, but at the same time I want to get one specific thing done. And there is a moment, and I think historians are more aware of this than others, when you have to say, I must stop here, right? Because there could always be more and better to do, but there is also kind of an objective quality and quantity and modus operandi, you could say, that you can appreciate as good, right? And that is important because it also sets a standard quality for the others in a way. And that's also in part what I try to do on Schwerpunkt. I can't say I have like the imposter syndrome fact for Schwerpunkt, because it seems to me that what I do here is in full liberty, and thus I have much less pressure than, say, of course, when I have to write an article or something, because there I'm forced by peer reviewing, by selection, whatever, and public shame, right? Of course, to be extremely precise and exact and correct about everything, because that's how the whole thing works. And in this sense, I think civilization, applied with dynamics that are bringing this quality down, and of course and when there is actually quality, not to have it noticed, right, or used or employed, but still does work, and we can be relatively satisfied with that. But again, it's always up to the person in many ways, and this is at the end of the day what the whole life philosophy, we're expressing here is containing. It's not just a matter of how to fix this specific problem, because again, you can't be an imposter everywhere, right? You can't feel so everywhere, because what's the level that you have to achieve to be actually right, pure, true? We are all failing at some level. We are of a fallen kind, so we have to always balance out the goods and the evils to a point in which we can assess that there is at least an improvement functionally in doing so. But again, there is always a better thing that you can do. So the imposter syndrome can be really paralyzing. I didn't really have this problem because from my side, I had always, which is often not the case, and that's where I think things get really bad, had the aforementioned confidence, sometimes even overconfidence, you can claim. I always believed in what I was doing, and I always defended, for example, my work when it was being, as I rightly thought, it was being unfairly criticized and or misrepresented. That is often an issue, right? And it depends greatly also in the doctoral experience what actually your checking methods from the side of those who have to supervise you really work like, right? And you can be really unfortunate, unlucky about it, as far as, for example, there are professors that are very invasive in the way they cope with they supervise your work, and or that have their own vision, and they tell you something, especially when you're suffering of that problem. They're somehow, in order maybe even to genuinely try to help, like to make you doing things that are not the right ones, right? And it's very interesting how to handle that relationship. I made a video about tutors, but I think I should make another one to properly explain how to cope with things you do publicly, as they oblige you at some point also to do, because there is partially a didactic, there is of course a moment in which you have to speak out loud in front of people about your work. You're not always sheltered and, let's say, doing whatever you want. I was most of the times, though, and this I recognize, as I explained in the other videos also, is a very unusual thing for how normally doctorates are structured nowadays, especially as far as I understand in the Anglosphere. A doctorate obliges you forcibly to publish, to write at least a lot, right, during the same research, and that's terrifying, right? It's something that was enforced exactly the years after I finished, and I was just talking with a colleague of mine about this, saying, we were the lucky ones, right? We had a lot of room of maneuvering, let's say, and freedom, generally speaking, for what we needed to do. And now everything is compressed because there is a sort of paranoia from especially the institutions, the bureaucracy, and all that side of the story, in a moment, of course, of civilizational contraction, that you're not the hand with the golden eggs, right? That you are fundamentally, in fact, an imposter, and that you're not cut for that type of job. And the unfortunate thing is that job is becoming, within the career structure, at least for how it is ever more restrictively conceived, just that kind of obsessive, compulsive need for you to publish constantly, because otherwise, there is this thing of excellency also, that are just names, right? Many people say, "Oh, I studied at this university because I have the excellency," and then what, right? Most names you hear actually about the allegedly best universities in the world, they're just frauds, right? First of all, they're very kind of corrupt in many ways, right? The way students get in, the way research are carried out, very, very managed in many ways. And there is that lack of, say, let's pick literally the best and let's give him, her room for what they're truly capable of doing. And we're losing that. We're losing that as a civilization. I come perhaps from a very, at least for the way historically developed, very peculiar educational background, but it's finishing even where I live. And this is not a good thing, right? And I'm really afraid that the future will unfortunately bring not much of an academic, scientific, and also moral improvement overall. And no, it's not the usual thing. No, I believe actually leftism is going to fall, at least as a continental European. We had this problem, of course, in our universities after World War II, but the demographics is literally dying out as a generation, and I don't know. My colleagues are mostly all basically we're conservative, right? I can't even say just only right winger. There are many leftists, especially in those fields like more like contemporary history, anthropology. But as far as hardcore history is concerned, like modern history, medieval, ancient, etc., I think there is a very good balance. At least it's here. I haven't seen much of that leftism. I mean, in spite of, of course, being aware also in the institutions I attended, there was a tendency towards that here and there, especially in the humanities. But it's not the full picture, right? We are fooling lots of people in making them believe that being undereducated is something to be, not studying humanities is something to be proud of, as if you could go out there in the world without in an again imperial traditional direction. It's complete nonsense. All the traditional elite was highly educated, especially in humanities, but also in science, and that is always needed. But it's also the combination between the two that makes most of in fact, a good science, good humanity is actually what they should be, in fact. So the imposter syndrome, I think, in the doctorates mostly occurs for obvious reasons, because you have a deadline, right? And it's not just, again, a series of deadlines. That's perhaps how they began to structure the system like that. That is to say, if you haven't written, say, a couple of articles the first year, I'll simply not let you pass in the next ones. You mostly had, like, at the end of the year, sort of report you had to write, and then you would talk a couple of times every year with the department professors, and they would ask you questions and so on. So it was fairly easy, because we also don't want our doctors to, PhD students to fail, right? There is an interest there that also, in fact, I don't think is a positive thing, but it's also something coming from more recent times, and we're habituated with people that would sometimes bail out, but because, say, they had just entered because they hoped to finish in time while they had work going on. So objectively, yes, the restriction even on the places was functional to the to putting that pressure. And as I was saying before, we're just in the last years in which we could be that autonomous. And this doesn't make it particularly better from the side of the syndrome, because you may feel, there are people who feel definitely, and everybody does, say, oh my God, when you start, you say, I don't know what I have to do practically, but I have time. I have enough time to think about that. And of course, the first year mostly is a phase of adjustment, of trying, of going out there, searching for, especially, I never actually worked in an archive, because I find it terrible, especially for what I study. It's, first of all, a waste of time, but just, it is properly, in fact, not what it's also a limitative way of researching, in my opinion, but I'm not going to digress on this. But let's say it's mostly at the end of the first year that professors start getting interested, because they know that at that point you should have gathered enough material to start eventually working hard on during the second year. And it's, in fact, mostly during the second year that the thing starts being a bit more, let's say, professors start asking more, and therefore you have to properly provide with answers, sometimes also with, again, concrete reports and so on, what you're doing and how, and you have to be consistent enough about that. I've never read a report from another, I actually did, right, and sometimes I realized that they sounded much more devoid of logic and actually hard concrete judgment about their work and what they were doing. And at least in my case, the main problem is that my work was so big that I think none of the people that was there was actually believing that I was doing so. And I needed to be, say, not generic, but saying, it's a lot of material. I can't just, in a report of a few pages, of course, explain you what it would have become a 600, 700, pages thesis eventually, the whole thing. And so they wouldn't even understand, right, what I was doing. That was a problem. I mean, in part, it also spurred my my necessity of working, but that was coming just from my own awareness that during the first year I had always been researching, but at the beginning of the second, I realized that all the stuff that I had gathered was, in that sense, not enough. Let's say not organized, not properly, not complete. Right? I was, as I told it many times. Basically, I made a hyper-detailed military history of every single military action that occurred in a given European region for 60 years, essentially from the end of the 13th and the first half of the 14th century. And again, wrote that elephantic work on it, right? And my problem was firstly methodological. I was extremely lucky to solve it, because I may have failed even from that point of view, and I was aware of that. At the beginning of the second year, still hadn't basically found what was necessary to make an accurate work of the entire the various politics that had taken in consideration for the research and their interaction. It was an incredibly complicated thing. And frankly, if I had been told at the beginning of the research what I would have done myself, I would have said at that point, it's impossible for me to do it because I didn't know exactly where to look for things. So I explained how I solved the problem, which was a bit like not cheating, but in a sense, of course, drawing the information from somebody else's work. That it's absolutely fine. Basically, I found something that is it doesn't exist, I don't know, I think in the world so far. And I found, with an extreme shot of luck, exclusively for my period and time I was researching on, that is a guy who literally studied all the sources of the time, the chronicles mostly, of course, but that's most in fact what you have in terms of elemental history and the military one, and literally made a day-to-day story of an entire century, actually, for which actually had problems for the end of the 13th, because this was for the 14th century. And I just proceeded there by reading all the sources that this guy had quoted also in the previous years. So I technically didn't copy anything, except, of course, this guy had thoroughly, of course, analyzed the sources and made the story of it all. And of course, I would reread them all and would check mistakes, because there were mistakes also in this guy's work. And from there, I picked, of course, the military information. That's where I gathered the sources on the base of which I wrote eventually my work. That is essentially a tactical analysis, but also a lot more. It's also about organic. It's also about strategy in part, about politics, about the costs of war. It was huge, again, and it's all original in that sense, but of course we are all working on the base of somebody else's work at that point. I don't even know how other people work, and in fact, there was a colleague who was writing a similar thesis to mine in terms of looking at a given region in a given time and reconstructing certain political military events. And while I had finished my work in the last year, I was talking to him. That is one of the guys that I told you before, I think is better than me as a historian. And he literally hadn't solved the problem at that point. I mean, he had written something, but basing himself just on a potpourri of info that he had found here and there, and not with that, heaven-sent work that I found, with an extreme amount of luck, and actually losing 1 year in the process, because I already had it on my hard disk. But I said, okay, well, I will use this, but I didn't know what it was, because I hadn't browsed it. I had lots of other stuff, and I didn't realize how useful that actually was, because I wouldn't even trust he was using all the sources, and I found out by researching myself that it was actually the case. And before that point, I objectively was feeling the imposter syndrome, because my problem since the first year was essentially telling myself, look, you don't know how to do this, right? You don't have the sources, or you have them, but you have to search them all, and you're doing it in a kind of approximate way. You are not using practically even a historiography here. You're just looking straight from the sources. You don't even know what actually happened in those years. And it does seem that maybe other, researchers on this topic function in a somehow similar way, like something perhaps that has looked a bit more in the background, as opposed to what you're doing from scratch, because they also started this without being an expert on the period, or having ever worked, if not with very few sources of those times and places. And I literally was saying, 1 year has gone by, it's 1/3 of the time. I was counting the months already, because I always do that. And you haven't actually even taken off, right? So this is a serious problem. And it can easily mean that if before the first year you haven't been able to find an adequate amount of information and to have framed them correctly, you will fail. So actually, thanks to the aforementioned work, I managed to do all the work in just a year and a half, let's say, as opposed to 3 as they would become 4 because actually 3.5 because of COVID, because they extended our scholarship. But I managed to finish in time, right? It's interesting that if COVID had not happened, and thanks to all the digitalization of lots of articles, other works that I needed mostly to fix the historiographical background from, I would have needed those extra 6 months which would have been enough at that point. But that would have made me like, this is the guy who landed to a head, right? And he could have done the work better. It would be seen like a black sheep or something. It would have not happened anything, because again, I know some colleagues that started 1 year after me. They're still to finish here. They gave them even more, like 1 year. I don't understand how, but they are, again, those people who to me look like I don't look like a kid. I look juvenile. Like I do look slightly younger than I am. These are the people that sometimes are born in the year even slightly later than me, and they already look like 40 years old with heavy beard, the professor's coat, and they seem to you they have already I could be the student, they could be the professor, right? Already by how they actually even speak and what they do. I have, again, probably a different background that formed me the way it turned out. But I know that they are doing a very good job. They have very high standards, and probably even just my work was very big. For example, it was also very good, but somehow was unrefined. Yes, it was a bit of a race, I must say. But the work was so huge, it was difficult to compress in the first place, and it turned out I will not probably publish it ever, because I was simply told by the expert in the field, look, it's such a huge pool of stuff that you can basically write articles non-stop, books too, on the base of that, and solely on the base of my doctoral thesis, and that's basically the path I'm following. But retrospectively, it was crazy. Like, even not so much. Like, it was crazy in the way I did it, because of time. And if I had known everything since the beginning, I would have probably written the greatest masterpiece ever. And in theory, I could still fix it. But exactly for this, I don't think that type of work could even be published, because first of all, it would turn out something like more than 1,000 pages. Who would even read it, right? I could crazily do it, but at the same time, it's important to publish a lot, and I still have to think about lots of things right now. And in fact, I entered just that publishing phase, but I realized that all the incredible effort I put at the time in this activity, it was due in part to the same pressure caused by the imposter syndrome. Because the imposter syndrome, let's be honest, is not a syndrome. Like, you somehow, unless you're of course not out of your mind for some reason, but you actually know, and much better than anyone else, whether you are doing anything with what you're working or it is just a fraud, right? You can't even, I know people, there are people who kill themselves. They say to the professors, to the parents, to whoever, that they're succeeding, that they're doing well, they're taking good marks. They arrived the day of the discussing their degree thesis, and they haven't done anything, and they kill themselves. That it did happen even at my university. I haven't quite, I don't think it was the years I was there, but this does happen, as we all know. Like, if you read the news every once in a while, you do read always the same thing, that these people that are so framed, they're so obsessed to, in not much in succeeding, but they, especially they're weak people. They're being dominated by others, where or another. They've been put pressure on, and they are always being. Actually, they have this incredible urge to just be free at a point, not to do what they are always being told. not to take the degree that they want because somebody else told them to, but doing literally what you want to do. And this even fucks up good potential, because maybe if they hadn't been pressured, they would have been much more functional people. They would have been successful, right? I was hardly ever pressured to do anything in my life. I remember just my parents, the only thing they rightfully forced me to do, aside from, of course, being a good student in general, right, but not being the excellent one. I know people that were pressured constantly by their parents like that, and some of them became geniuses, but a bit neurotic and a bit weird in many ways. But mostly they were unhappy, and somehow they had strained relations and this kind of thing. But the only thing was swimming, and I ended up practicing it for 12 years because I love it. So that's a completely different thing, and that was good, right? So there is always a degree by which you must be oppressed to be a functional human being, right? There is no such thing like a person left alone accomplishing anything. And this is also very interesting because as far as especially the doctoral experience is concerned, because you put yourself to an incredible amount of pressure, under an incredible amount of pressure also, because not just of the work in itself, but again of these expectations, and you kind of get yourself into it, right? And the interesting thing is that you've never had to handle a work which literally takes years to accomplish, and that therefore you can't quite stop in the meanwhile, and delivering the product in the end successfully, concretely, in a good way. And there is a sense of here we are all kind of friends, but if you don't work, like the thing is gonna be you're gonna fail practically, because also it's not easy to start. You can always kind of begin. I know people that started PhDs, they stopped them, and then they started others, of course, because they couldn't be the same ones. But it's also something that if you come from a straight background like mine, where you had always succeeded, gone on, and this was kind of the obvious last step, right? You start, the more you go on, the greater the pressure you start feeling, right? It's just even at university, it's similar after all. I mean, some things get better, other worse, but at the end of the day, what you get into these various stages for is to be ever more pressured by the sheer amount of work that you are expected to, because it's primarily a matter of quality. It's primarily a matter of you taking the thing to a next qualitative step that in this case is in theory the best thing that our academies can come up with, and sometimes it is disappointing unitly. But I think a trick to handle the imposter syndrome is also to be, of course, very aware of at least the importance of what you're doing, yes, but also the of the actual topic that you're discussing. Not necessarily, you don't even have to be an expert about that, but you must have a question, and you must find the ways to answer it, right? And finding the ways, it's all about what this is about and how the imposter syndrome comes about, because you don't know it at the beginning. And so you start wondering, am I adequate, am I not? And the typical feelings that you experience at that point is the aforementioned thing. They ask you, how is the research going? It can be your family, your friends, your colleagues, your banally, your girlfriend. I mean, this whole thing of succeeding is important also, as in many ways, right? Having that number, having that, even sheet of paper is something that makes the difference at many levels. And so if you fail, the question is, how will I see myself after? How will other people see myself afterwards? And again, today's philosophy is, don't care at all about how others see you. That's not accurate, right? That's not actually even healthy as a concept. There is obviously an important degree of collective recognition that makes us eventually functional, and to the world, to actually lead it, to provide ourselves with the capacity to be reliable, to be accomplished, to essentially make things work that others can't make it work, and therefore making you acquire prestige. And also, it is absolutely not true that you shouldn't care about what others think, because what others think is also, from some directions, what can be an advice. It can be like, the way, in fact, it will influence you in making the job. For example, I had a very understanding tutor who had, I had built a lot of a beautiful relationship with her, because there was a lot of trust from both sides. She had been following me throughout the whole university path already, and she never pressured me, even too much. I mean, objectively, again, at the beginning of that second year, when I felt the greatest, that imposter syndrome, because time was running out, I was saying, I'm worried because I'm not entirely sure how this is still going to turn out. And I remember this person always tell me, look, don't worry about this. You just do what you think it's good. Of course, I was up to something, right? I was doing something. But again, I don't think I still today, of course, I was doing it well yet. And just eventually made it. And this may be actually a strategy, right? It's a way to, of course, leave room, to leave enough space to the person for reflecting, even to realizing these problems. And never talked about the imposter syndrome with somebody else, because eventually first of all, when you succeed, you tend to be like, aha, yeah, I made it and whatever. But we all know that this is an issue, right? And we all know that we're trying essentially to win over the favor of our tutor. I've seen guys shaking in front of a professor telling them they were doing something wrong. I've seen even very harsh criticism. I've seen perhaps even excessive one, right? My work has been criticized as well, at least at the time, simply because they didn't understand what I was doing, right? And even when they read it, I mean, the experts said, oh, this is a great job. And the others said, that were checking me in my department, because these are just people brought in, even if they're not expert in your topic, because they're just part of the department, and that express perplexities because they literally don't know what the thing is. So of course I had my revanche in many ways, but at least I knew I was right at the time. That helped me actually building confidence, because I realized, and that's one of the things that impressed me the most in my life, when you are actually doing things right and others annoy you. And at that point, you see, it's hardly a matter of perspective, because there is only one truth, right? And you may not have it, but the question is, a work either is good, as assessed by essentially the community of the actual experts and what they normally read and know about this stuff, or it isn't, right? You can't simply step into a field that you don't know and say, it's as if, I don't know, I looked at an engineering project and said, no, this doesn't work, without having known anything about engineering, So, of course, there is a sort of criticism that can be profitably functioning, even from kind of non-experts, right? This it happened to me, right? That even, I don't know, listening to a music recording. A friend of mine was a musician, and he told me, "Look, listen, I don't know, so I love music, but just out of amateurly." And he made me listen to a piece, and I said, "Well, according to me, this thing doesn't sound like it." And yeah, he said exactly that's the point. And I wouldn't even know how to explain that music in music language, right? But technically speaking, you can appreciate. But as long as it is, again, just an impression, a take, and you don't step in with the idea, no, this is absolute, I don't know, garbage, I don't like it, and you don't even appreciate what's the work behind it, and you're even actually wrong about the whole assessment, right? That can bring people down. I'm not aware specifically of people who were treated badly in ways that would enter almost in a conflict with the alleged authority. Actually, I think I was the greatest problem when I was there. I mean, I wasn't the greatest problem. I explain now why, but exactly because of the size of my work and this almost like kind of behind the curtains hard work that I couldn't even have the time to explain, because they brought us there to speak for 20 minutes, and you can't explain a work of that kind in progress when it's going to be 700 pages, and having 20 minutes in which people make dumb questions and they don't even, understand what you're doing can work profitably, right? But there was this tension, which actually always develops from pre-existing, like, I don't like you, you don't like me. When there's something about a person that you just don't like, in their character, in their posture, in ways that you can all immediately smell that they're not right. And so, surprise, surprise, the most complex people, the ones with some evident faults, etc., are always the ones that make problems, and the others may criticize you openly, directly, and telling you useful things, and those others just instead want to appear, want to show that they don't want to help you. They actually don't give a damn, because when you eventually ask them how to fix the thing, they don't even answer you. I met these attitudes, and you realize they hate you for some reason. And I don't know why, because, again, with me, people, generally speaking, either they love me or they hate me. Like, there is no middle ground. And I realized that maybe I'm too straightforward. Maybe I am too I just do things on my own. Many people don't accept this. They don't, and I know that this may be sometimes, you do your own thing, maybe you do it the wrong way, but it turned out, again, I didn't. So it's difficult there not to see what is left of the possible reasons of conflict. And again, I have to sadly say that even very often physical faults cause this kind of problems, right? And places of origin, right? These kind of complexes that eventually mold the person and make it more like a joke of a person than they actually are. The others they can be not interested, they may even not like you. You can sense that, but they can act fairly, and then you like them for it. And I love it, honestly. And so that sometimes is caused exactly to undermine you. And I would say never let yourself being undermined by others. That's as far as it must go, right? If there is a criticism, take it for the technicality of it. Take it for what you actually know the work really is, because in this context, you're the only one who knows that. Obviously enough, if you go there and you say, look, I haven't done anything, or I don't know what's going on, you also have to be, let's say, patient with yourself in many ways. You have to give yourself time. You have to tell yourself that this is hard, but it's normal to be hard. So again, you must enter into a mindset which you know that there's going to be difficulties, but that the only way to surpass them is to find the solution. And that's the actual problem. There is no magic trick to solve the thing automatically or by default. Sometimes you can be lucky, as it was my case. Sometimes you can be maybe you can do well, but things can go wrong for another reason. In any case, you have to be fair and honest. That I also think that is the best thing, because if you are in trouble for some reason, and you need help because you feel the need to be listened to, it may not even be about the work, but exactly about this sense of inadequacy or insecurity. Just be open about that, right? Don't hide yourself, because when people really tend to fail the worst is when they actually lie to people. And they not only lie because, of course, and this is not true just because they lie, of course, and that is bad, because they evidently know that there is something severely wrong to the point of hiding it to others, or even making up stories about it. But in this sense, they actually destroy the trust, right, of the other person. So they are really less because they did something wrong, right? I remember one of the reasons why they were tormenting me a little bit, but really mildly, right, for other reasons, mostly because I didn't answer to emails. I wanted to be left the fuck alone in general, right? Just coincidentally, I also wasn't very talkative about my work, so they thought that I was just, I don't know, on vacations or God knows what. Instead, I was actually always working and just not bragging about it. Excuse me, I drink a little. It was a colleague of the, I think she was from the year before mine, yeah. No, actually, no, she was from 2 years before, but, you stay there 3-4 years, so we had partly done this together for a time. And this girl came, basically, again, it's 3 years, so imagine you arrive 2 months before the deadline, telling, by the way, another colleague first, not even your tutor, that is supposed to be there exactly for these problems too, that she did actually work, as it turned out, for real, but she was very far from having written a thesis that you could call something like it. Right now, in this time, like, I began to write my thesis exactly 1 year before the deadline, right? Or at least, I had began to write pieces before, but I was started to putting that together into a, readable form overall organically from the first year, and then I from the beginning of the last year, and I would non-stop. There were 7 chapters. I wrote one a month, then COVID happened, so I ended up writing for another year, almost and a half, so that helped me. But let's say it was like continuous. I wasn't doing anything else, but this had emerged exactly from the realization that I needed to fix the problem myself. That's the main obvious moment when you at least manage in that case to surpass the imposter syndrome, because the imposter syndrome happens at the point of you must have written that thesis by the end. What's happening in between? Everything you think, admittedly, at the time is, in fact, of time itself. You're saying, how long does it take? What do I have to do? How do I do it? Where do I find the stuff? It can be really demanding, but that's something you must do at the end of the day. If you're not willing to do it, then maybe you should leave. But the point is also, you should even give yourself a chance, right? You may fail, but at least you may have been able to salvage something, to write at least a part of the work. Doing something that in fact is not that much, but it can still be those 200, 300 pages that of hopefully substantial things that you want to write, right? In this sense, I think that perhaps we're even attributing too much importance to PhD degrees, because I've seen them. Like, I was working for myself. There are many people out there just working for the title because it can make them access. And there is not much of a great work behind that. And consequently, everything gets down to ever less qualitative stuff that can be good for maybe the person, of course, that wants to go by the the official steps. But if the steps are of a ladder that's becoming ever more creaky and kind of about to fall apart as a broader system, I don't think so, because you can have private people, like I also partly work like, that aside from assistantship and the broader career that they may hope to get into, they can do more, they can even earn more, and because they maybe have done more. So I think that the imposter syndrome also revolves around how motivated you are in the first place to do that. I strongly suspect that many people that just can't make it, sometimes it's because they have admittedly chosen something that is not for them. Right? Probably again, I was incredibly advantaged by this thing. I was left alone most of the time. But I realized, well, that if I had been put under constant pressure since the first year, I would have not liked to do it, right? And that I loved instead what I did, because at least I had the time to sit there and say, look, there's a problem now. How the hell do I solve it? We have time, and let's do our best in this regard. And it really, I must say that problems fix themselves. The harder you press, right? The harder you need to fix things, or the more desperate you are in a way, and the more you sharpen your mind in a way to fix the problem. So if you don't feel that pressure, you're not going to fix the thing. It's like when I bailed out of economics the first 6 months of university. I was doing this thing, but I was innerly hoping to fail. I was literally sabotaging the whole thing, the exams and all, because I knew that I really didn't like it that much after all. I thought it was different than I thought, and I just was not preparing myself to make things work. Right? When you are, generally speaking, when you get that opportunity of the PhD, assuming that it is done, it's an opportunity taken in a context, of course. There are, again, many doctoral titles today that are just bought, right? There are entire countries that basically buy them, right? So you have no idea of how heterogeneously, even unpredictable this thing is, right? There are no obvious divides even within the West, etc. Sometimes you find places that are kind of, people think out there that they don't do anything, whatever, that they have some of the finest selection methods, some of the finest teaching, etc. Some other names instead are so big and they say, oh, everybody, that's an institution, wow, and then they actually write terrible things. And it depends largely also on the person. There is no doubt about this, but it is also about, in fact, how the work is done, and there are differences literally even in the program, in the didactic, and so on. And the more I go on, and the more I realize that the almost humanistic method in a world that is becoming ever more feudal in that sense is better, because you must give time for good things to happen. It can't be just quantity. You must invest in quality in some degree. And the risk, of course, there is always also, getting there. So in the first place, losing the place, and that also should be a thing. More selection, actually, and just for the best people, and not a banal selection of who has just formally done more, but actually who has ideas that sound right, and having educators that are able to recognize that, and are not just about going by the book per se. I think again, I was lucky in that the imposter syndrome was surpassed in a relatively easy manner from my side, but I know that there are many people who suffer of that because they are just misunderstood, And whenever we look at that approach, of course, you know that it's potentially exactly that misunderstanding that can fuel the problem fixing part. It was my case, and it was also a matter, of course, of other motivational factors. It can be whatever, but at the same time, if you feel like you are basically telling people lies, if you are essentially trying to picture your situation in a bit better light than it actually is, even though knowing that the situation is disastrously wrong, actually. It's more than that. One thing is just, again, preparing, showing like I'm working, things are going fine, it's how I planned them. And in a way, it's even difficult to attack you. But if you're just lying big, that's a pretty disastrous indicator, right? As we were saying before, that girl eventually made it because they gave her a lot of months, but it caused a shock in the department because, it showed how after all faulty the checking system had been. And that's hardly like, maybe I understand because, she was followed by one of the professors that I disliked thoroughly, and that maybe wanted to act more harshly afterward because they thought it had been his fault because his student had managed to trick him in some way, because you don't arrive 2 months before the deadline without telling such a thing. And in that sense, I got pretty, because I am a pretty aggressive person. I don't sit there silently, especially when somebody is, being wrong or trying to vent for their own problems or whatever. I always respond quite straightforwardly, and this is also something that they come to fear at some point. But there are moments in which you also have just to not let it go per se, but realizing that maybe that's not the point, right? Maybe that you must defend your work with the work itself, right? Because at the end of the day, I think it's difficult to be really blocked across the path unless you haven't properly done anything, which is also strange because at that point there is more than just a problem. Right? It's either you're basically making a fraud and lying and whatever openly for some reason, or literally you have severe mental strains of some sort. You have some problems in handling the matter, and this is the point. I don't think that the imposter syndrome is there as a sort of hallucination that you're somehow not fit to the task, because if there is no selection in the process, if there is no risk to fail, and if there is no there is always just, no, you're so good, you're fine. What's the point of you being there in the first place? They should just crown you like, the best, I don't know, person who gets, things done without actually doing them. Like, if you feel like you are, you have to tell some lie for, just handling the situation, then eventually succeeding on your own, it's one thing. If you are instead perfectly knowing that you are not adequate for the job, you don't have the capacity of what you're doing there, it's literally another matter, right? I don't think copying is also much there. Today it's very difficult to copy, especially in serious places. Like, I know, of course, it's very common in certain countries, especially look east, where you see things like, again, literally it's like a family tradition or something, or like a friendly thing, right? People just copying the thesis of their friends who has sent it to them, and they just modify some aspect. Today it's almost practically impossible to copy, especially big works, because it's incredibly easy. Just put the thesis in a machine and they tell you what's the percentage you've copied, literally. So there is also not much of a way around that. There are probably other ways people find to fix the problem. For example, I know in some countries they just tell you, look, I want to do this PhD, okay, you pay, and maybe you have it written by somebody else, which naturally you have to find, and you get the thing done. Those are ridiculous, right? Everybody has a PhD. Seemingly this is very frequent in Spain, as far as I know, which is strange, by the way, because, at least I was told, but you immediately understand that, at least compared to where I've done the thing, it's a completely different process, just of selection, of how you literally, the various steps and how the thing is done. And sadly enough, I think it's all transforming in a sort of business rather than a real selection. And that's the moment in which you realize also the pressure you can get for real from these events, and why paradoxically there are so many people who are anxious or whatever. Because sometimes I don't think they actually do much. I think they are actually told just to act, like to pretend they're doing something with it, and instead they are just struggling to get the title and nothing else. And they are not there because they have an idea and they just want to develop it, and they think it can change, I don't know, historiography, like in my case, or whatever. It's because they just want to show they're the next umpteenth doctor that is, because of this phenomena, becoming an ever less important title in the first place. And of course, not that that the rest is better, right, per se. We do need still, as I was saying at the beginning, that the system gets the thing done in terms of quality overall. But there are too many divides in this, and it's very bad for those who actually do the thing better to see what it really goes on. And we really live also in a world in which you can't quite find an objective commentator anymore. Like, we basically established that there is this band of the population with this type of degree that is allegedly the best, whatever, and we assume that's all we need to hear and accept. But then, of course, we are not the ones that say, actually, this thing is not so worthy as it seems. But not even other people want to believe that we are in the hands of incompetent people. At the end of the day, it seems to me that we are joking too much. We don't have high enough standards. There will probably be a parallel system that will replace this, and that will actually take just the people who are very competent. Sometimes I am stopped even by others by saying, I have private contacts that tell me, wow, but even just from Schwerpunkt, that they tell me, like, what do you do? I'm interested in things you say. It's because the world is evidently going to be interested in some types of information. If you lock this information in too much sclerotic systems that are, at the end of the day, self-referential, and people are not going to read, etc., what's the point also for the rest of the world to have you in the first place? Yes, you can teach these things, but I don't believe that teaching, let's say, I do Schwerpunkt, for example, exactly for these reasons. But it's something I do because I, in fact, think it can be marketed in some way. Because I think it's much tastier, let's say, aside from, kind of disorderly videos like this, because you're expecting, I'm finally talking about how you freak out when you feel imposter syndrome, like, but they are, let's say, I tend not to lie, as you know. I don't come here with the idea of showing how good and capable and competent I am. I just tell you things. When I don't know something, I say it. I don't know it. When I make a mistake, I say I make a mistake. Like, it's not a problem. But this is connected with the imposter syndrome thing, because you realize there are plenty of people out there that they're not just lying about a deadline or whatever. They are lying about the entire constituent fabric of the whole system, and consequently also of themselves. Right? Sometimes, when especially you work very hard, and it may happen that other people are so not used to it that they may simply not even accept that you're doing what they do. Sometimes they are even envious. Sometimes they're even like, oh my god, this guy is going to, I don't know, it does happen too often. You also fear to be copied, for example, but you fear also that somebody's coming and is kind of beginning to write about the type of the topic that they want to specialize in. So there are these bitter tensions, and I think that the best professors, the best doctors are those that accept the challenge and they are polite, and there is, generally speaking, like a good still standard along, especially this behavioral line. But I'm not sure the next like most people are becoming something today are actually that qualified in the first place, and so they are ruining the system for everyone. Also, I believe that there is an enormous kind of paranoia, generally speaking, about, again, being evaluated, being judged, etc. And if you get into these mechanisms, you know that you're going to take flack, right? It's kind of obvious, and you also have, legitimate concerns about that, because one thing you publish wrong, or that your reputation can be damaged by it. So there are interesting dynamics as far as they're concerned, but I think we arrived to a point also in general alleged culture in which people don't even understand what it means to work hard anymore in these fields. Once I was talking to a girl, I told her, well, it takes like 3 months to write a good article. And she said, like, how 3 months? Like, I don't know what she thought like an article is, but she probably the stuff you find on the internet when you ask stupid questions, right? Just a few words about without any quote about anything. Look, we are evidently failing as far as properly the educational standards are concerned. We're failing in making people understand that default reality is by far more complex than anything that they can probably suspect. And as a consequence, we're also bringing, because of an unfair system that tends to just inject people because of, for example, what they look like or whatever in the system without being competent enough, without being properly even having the backbone, having the moral stamina to withstand like a pressure, like, again, handling this big work for a long time really is. Like, normally there is a selection, there is school, there is university and so on, but even there, sometimes we're not making a good job at all, right? So my opinion is less people, but that study with much better and much greater and much constant education over time. I mean, right? The question, the learning over time. There isn't another way to actually make the best and to properly mold a mentality that is able to approach the bigger and ultimately more important issue, and then complaining because, I don't know, there is stress among PhDs. Of course, if you treat a PhD student like just like somebody like a machine that has to make a certain amount of articles in a given time because otherwise it's out. Like, what are you doing this in function of? You're evidently doing it in function of something that is external to what is actually needed, in terms of quality of that work. That's not quality. That's just a strained machine that is not even given the time to do anything but stupid damn articles, and we can't find people that can write a decent thesis that is longer than 200 pages. And naturally, this makes them much less intelligent, much less resourceful, and much less truly productive than they can actually be if you actually put a human to do that kind of work. And you can't have that. And the reason why this inflated mechanism actually works like that is that you accept too many people. There are too many doctors. There are too many people who want to be doctors and nothing else. And of course, there is a great problem also probably in the mentality, again, in the ideologism behind that, in also the sclerotic and sometimes even sadistic mentality of the establishment, as far as for example, some professors are concerned. They literally don't give a fuck about what you do, but they want just to come out there and they have to say two things, and they maybe they don't even know what you're doing or whatever, but maybe they have to say something, and maybe they say something that maybe just damages your work, as opposed to realizing what it actually is. So faster is definitely not better at all, right? More is not better at all. We must teach people to do things that expand the intellectual capacity to a great degree, but on a work that, of course, when I say more, it can be even, a thesis of 500 pages, but it is complex enough. This is the point, where you can have theses that are more complex than mine, that are only 200 pages, right? But when you actually read them, you often realize that they aren't, because they haven't thought big enough. They haven't thought that, what I had to do was really what they love to do. Damn, I love to write that thesis. It was an enormous effort, but I know I wasn't an imposter at the end of the day, because I had a point for doing that thing. That was not just getting the title. And I did it, and nobody obliged me to do it. You see what's the power of, really loving what you do. But you don't need others to tell you how, first of all, to do it. And especially you don't need others to, or their titles or whatever, to make you do the work that you really need for your life. So everybody's an imposter as long as the system decides them out in a way or another. But there is hardly any other imposter, if not those who fundamentally just cheat and want to convince others that they're working, they aren't, right? Those are just falsaries, and they are kind of bad people in the first place, and they deserve to be stigmatized, they deserve to be kicked out, whatever. But also they deserve to be understood, at least in as much as they can be the symptom of a problem that is the one of the mechanism, rather than just of the individual. That is to say, why did that imposter arrive there in the first place? Right? There is a hole in the system, and who's responsible for that? Not just that person, evidently, right? So the imposter syndrome hits really hard. It can be a real problem, but if you realize that it's just a warning about something that is not going as it should, and you evidently know why, because otherwise you wouldn't even think there is anything wrong, well, at that point you should take it as a blessing, as an opportunity to say, look, here you have to rather motivate yourself in the process. And so the imposter syndrome, like I think if you go on the internet and you essentially look at this thing of the imposter or whatever, they mostly talk about that you may actually not be the right person. You may actually feel like bailing out because you don't think that's your life and all this thing. But the question is, first, who cares? I mean, nobody asked you to get in it. I may understand that by some degree you may have not known it before, but the question should rather be, why don't we accept that people sometimes are spoiled to the point they're not willing to make any effort to succeed, and they just think that maybe failing in a PhD is again a matter of you didn't have the right mentality, as opposed to actually being really interested in such a huge opportunity like a PhD really is, right, in the first place. Because at the end of the day, most people make PhDs, it's not just because of the title, it can make them access to a higher place, but it's also about receiving a scholarship during the same period, and getting money for it. So that may be a reason why there are imposters, there are real imposters, right? But at the same time, in history, it would take an enormous amount of energy to just fake to the point of getting there, because that is not really, wouldn't really make too much sense, right? Because other people who are capable of making more effort than actually a good one, just to trick the whole system. So and not kind of instead just work in the right way to make it work normally, just to get the scholarship. Obviously, if you get there in a way or another, you more or less know what this job is about, and if you do, you can make it. You may have arrived to the step in your career in which it's too difficult for you, and that we understand. But if the issue is rather, I start feeling that I'm not adequate for being there. The question is, what did you get there for? Right? It's not very credible. I never believed in it. And it really seemed to me that it was rather an excuse of some sort, right? For being too unmotivated. Right, and again, yet I know people who got to PhDs and they didn't like it for one way or another, because you don't know how it is when you're there. Also, this is in part true. But in that case, it's because they literally wanted to make else, right? Some also make up excuses like, it wasn't for me. That's what we always do, or it was impossible. And make it worse than it is. But overall, I would say the general picture is that you can make it work if you want, and that entails always a lot of work. Always, there's no way out of that. If you arrive again to the point that you don't know what to do, because the work could be, as it was in my case before my turn, singly inadequate, right? But again, if you feel that, it's because you can recognize why it's inadequate, and if you can recognize what's inadequate, you can ask, hopefully, for help to do it well. And at that point, even if you don't like it, even if it means to essentially say, I have to be guided, or have to recognize that I wasn't that capable, etc. Well, you essentially still have a chance to make it work. Again, and it's basically what the system is also there for, what your tutors are there for. And so giving simply up on the whole thing, in my opinion, is not convenient, because having a doctorate is always useful in a way or another. So I wouldn't throw it away. I know perfectly what it feels, because in those imposter syndrome moments, you start feeling, but what about my life if I didn't get in, right? In my case, say if I bailed out, right? In my case, I was incredibly thankful. I had gotten in. I had made a vow. I had felt very spiritually about it, for many reasons. And so my point is that for having gotten in, I had to earn the whole thing, and so I had to work anyway and succeed in the first place, because otherwise I knew that I could have not really seen myself anymore as I did before. And I know people are fascinated sometimes by other mechanisms, like I don't know, they think they can make more money if they are out there doing other things, and they can accommodate themselves waiting for their death, hoping to have founded the right business. I think that if you can't really do something that you like, that you see as convenient, you can manage, because you're also very interested in improving your own capacity, well, you shouldn't give up, right? Because while it is true that there is always time for a PhD, there is also always time for doing things when you have the opportunity of doing them. And the better, let's say, the earlier you do them, kind of the better it turns out to be most of the times. The point here seems to me particularly relevant, let's say, because I don't think we have all the time that we want. The doctorates are pretty demanding things also in terms of time, as you understand. So the earlier the better, generally speaking, or unless you have already I know lots of, especially older people, that have already jobs and do the PhD. Usually it's terrifying. They waste, let's say, a place for people that could work much more thoroughly in them, and I think it could always be, say, more integrated again in what the natural course of things really is. Feeling an imposter, in my opinion, most of the times it really means that you are inadequate by a degree that shouldn't make you decide to bail out, but just to fix the problem if you can, and just trying till the last. It can be emotionally stressful, I know that, because it lasts years, and naturally this is not going to last the entire time, because obviously, let's say, if you know when you arrive at the end whether you have already made a good work or not, right? You can be criticized or not, but generally speaking, some, you know essentially what is going to work, what is not going to work. So you have 1 year, maximum 2 years. Like the typical year of the imposter syndrome is the second, because of essentially the same reason that happened to me, because you basically should be at a point where you have already started the core of your work, and if you haven't, there is a problem. After which, you can also, of course, decide, look, I'm not able at this point. I literally don't know what to do, but it's how likely is that, right? You have presented a project, you're evidently, you know something about it. You have won the selection because you essentially have proven, in a way or another, that this thing was feasible in the first place, because somebody else had to supervise it. Somebody else that is more expert than you at the moment. So again, it's just, in my opinion, an alibi to pretend that you're an imposter, until again you keep screwing up and you deny that to yourself very often, not just to others, but to yourself. Right? At the first year, you can deny to yourself that things aren't going that well. At the second, you must basically realize that thing must have started. This may have to do also with the type of path you're following. I should be always very careful about time, because it's obvious that you could have not arrived where I did arrive. As at the beginning of the third year, I was very impressed 1 year later when I had essentially secured all the core of my work and I had made this incredible rush, and it was fixing things that met a colleague on another subject that was saying that he hadn't still quite started the thing at the end of the second year. Right? It seemed, I don't even know whether he succeeded or not. He had some important issues in his life the first year, but the question is, it was just described so simply, so neatly, that the attitude was, well, just a no, I'll see now. And you can't really recuperate, in my opinion, if it's a serious thing, just in 1 year. It seems to me excessive, right? I think that 3 years is really the best. It depends. There are doctorates that last actually much longer, as far as I know, but not much in our field. So again, everything has its time. Don't, especially in the first year. This is, I think, quite common. I think how to prevent a bit the imposter syndrome. During the first year, the normal approach is to push yourself, like saying, I will do everything now, so in the last year I will just leave out of essentially just out of rent, in a way. I don't think it is very wise, because the first year you literally can't know what it's going to be the other ones, right? Unless, what do you want to do? All the work in 1 year, and then the other years are just, you can't do it. It's rather untypical, though. You should actually dose your own work if you want to do it better, right? The ideal is to have gathered all the sources the first year, to work on them all the second, and to finally write all the third. But I basically found nobody sticking to that kind of work, unless they were very technical subjects, like probably, you can never say it, because again, finding the evidence is difficult, but generally speaking, I don't know, maybe people study more like codicology, they have less sources, they can write more, compare, they may be they will surely write less in that way, but in a way they're more contained, or people just content themselves with writing 200 pages and they think that's a great thesis. I'm not like that. I mean, unless you discover who knows what, of course, that's another case, but especially if you don't know exactly what you're going to do, fishing in a broader with a broader net is sometimes actually funnier. At least it was in my case, because you can discover things you said, wow, I didn't know this, and you actually start stumbling in them since the beginning most of the time. The problem is putting that together. That, I think, it's mostly a methodological problem. We will talk about this. I will offer a pattern even for a specific type of research that was carried out for military history, how I proceeded. But let's say imposter syndrome is fueled mostly by the fact of pretending that everything is fine at the beginning, and then finding yourself at a point where you say, oh my god, it wasn't fine at all. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I came to that conclusion. I remember I was telling to a teacher in a private situation, actually a language class paid by my school, covered by my PhD scholarship, that literally, like last year, I didn't have the faintest idea was doing. Of course, I would have never told it to my professors at the department, nor necessarily my colleagues, because I think that also the imposter syndrome is all a bit about pride. That is all what moves you, right? You don't want to be criticized. You don't want to be, at least for the wrong reasons, you don't want to be, portrayed in a way that you're really not, right? That's part of the provocation, in a way. You should be pressured, you should be tested. But it should be on grounds that are, with very direct questions, with very direct points. And there are, of course, it's plenty of, let's say, of course, of situations where you can successfully speak to different, to your tutor, first of all, privately, also properly a personal relationship is established, you can really easily. But with also other professors, as long as you can ask for advice really to anyone, as far as you're concerned. And the interesting side of the story, I think, is also in that regard, motivating yourself on the base of also, when a person says, "My God, you're doing this. That's interesting. Have you tried this? Have you tried that?" There's always something that can come helpful in letting other people know. But sometimes I would argue, at least this is for me, because I'm mostly introverted, you can say derive some sort of motivation from almost in your head competing with the other colleagues, even when you like them, even you wish the best for them, like saying, how is this other person doing? I think colleagues are great to discuss these problems, because they are not going to tell really anyone, right? Unless you are, in trouble. Really, the thing like it happened with that one. She told, in fact, one of her colleagues, but in a more formal way, right? In my case, that was the other, another guy that, I'm from medieval history, he's from modern history, but we had done the entire university together. We started the same year, at the same department, and we were always saying, why do I do this? It's hard, it's complex. I always, doubts. You don't know how it's gonna go. Yeah, and that helps you realizing sometimes, at least it was the case for me, because I always keep to keep things for myself most of the cases, that when you think to be in deep trouble, actually other people are often in much worse conditions than you are, right? And this is kind of sometimes very theoretical, because it makes you understand that of course what you think is your own standard sometimes is much higher than what most people actually think. That can make you see things in perspective, but it also can motivate you to do better in the meanwhile. I don't know about you, but whenever I saw somebody, when you are down, like in any ways, because it's tiring to make this whole thing. The idea that somebody is even failing, or maybe you can look at other people that are, not even in the PhD, that are maybe lagging behind or doing something else, and seeing the misery of it all. In a life perspective, it's easy, because you say you can treasure more. You are better placed. You are better suited. So just improve on that, because it can always turn out useful. I always had that kind of treasure mentality. That's how I built a library of over 11, almost 12,000 actually books. And in any way, and it helped me dramatically to get past things, to make them work. So to me, again, everything can help contribute to get past, to move, to increase your capacity, right, and your confidence in finding the actual way that is there and that can help you fix the problem. And of course, there are when you sometimes the imposter syndrome comes, as it does happen sometimes, from having, for example, aimed too high. And you will surprise yourself, as it happened to me, as I was saying before, that surpassing the imposter syndrome made me do more than what I thought it was possible that I was failing at during the imposter syndrome moment. That was a great lesson, because it showed me that nothing was really impossible. You just have to find a way. And ways are subtle, ways are bastard. Like you don't have to, it's a war, right? Nobody's quite giving you anything aside from affections and what they can mean for you, etc. But it's always a matter of trying and trying harder, and hardly of improving yourself in any moment, right? I think it's crucial. Maybe today I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome as a broader issue, like in many ways. But from a psychological point of view, especially. But I think that you're never going to come out of the imposter syndrome phase until you actually, of course, focus on what you must do in order to fix the thing, which may sound banally ridiculous, but it's really not, because you can circle around about how long you can write something, but not necessarily about writing it well or making it consistent or making it what you really want it to be. So focusing on doing, on researching, on finding stuff is always the key, and that's why also, again, in my PhD Tales playlist, I have enumerated a series of issues that can help you also methodologically, right? Do you want to do a certain work? What should you do, and how would you do it? It can be very difficult. It can be really complicated, and it's not easy at all, right? But once you do it, you're into it, and you can expand, and you will expand constantly. So you don't have to feel too much in trouble. Even at the beginning of the second year, when you tend to feel that, always remember that you can, first of all, you will hurry in the end anyway, right? We all know that. But secondly, there is always something you can do. That, let's say, even in a year and a half, you can really write a good 200 even thesis pages. Thesis is not a huge thing, but because compared to what I did, but I would say I'm the best example of this, because in essentially a year and a half, I managed to basically arrive at the end writing, again, a triple length thesis, and it even actually a good one overall. So reflect on it, because it can really help you a lot about along the whole journey, and it can definitely show you how consistently certain moments of crisis are meant to help, right? Always remember, when you spot there is something wrong, there is something wrong, and you have the privilege of realizing it and thus starting to solve the problem. And I'm afraid it's the only way to go on eventually to solve it. And it's tiring, it requires a lot of effort and whatever, but also, what are we doing anything at that point for, if not, right? That's, I believe, the single most important aspect of the entire issue. Again, I would have liked to be a bit more psychological today, while really telling you what it feels to be in that situation, but it's not easy. It's a mix of pressure deriving from the wall. It's essentially trying to convince sometimes the people who are surveilling you that you're working. That's not difficult to do when you actually work, but you may be working, still not getting there, and that's actually also what the imposter syndrome is about. It's not about doing nothing, right, or faking on the fact you're on vacations as opposed to be working. It's about sometimes realizing that you need your own time, and you need a very specific mechanism to cope with the thing, and succeeding, right, in solving the problem. That's as far as it must go in practice. There aren't many other ways to do the thing per se, right? If you want, you can share your like just not also for the doctorate, for any other context, your opinion about this, because we all go through different types of imposter syndrome, I guess. And we can you can post it here. You can message me privately as well. I don't want to become a a consultant as far as that is concerned, but I can eventually make videos explaining how to cope with certain situations, right? It can be interesting, in my opinion, because I often do it. Like, people write me, they tell me, look, there is sort of need to, sometimes here it's difficult. I had this problem. Where can I find this information? Or it's a way just to open up, even that way. And if it makes a good let's say video topic, I will exploit it, of course, without revealing your private issues, but surely addressing them in general. So in order to say, at least it was like this for me, and I can think it to work in a similar way. Again, these videos are sometimes feel like they're going nowhere by a degree, but they're actually helpful and useful, and I would think it's time to have that conversation sometimes more than we do, because the imposter syndrome is taken often as a stigma, and it should be just seen as an opportunity instead. And that's where you have to be able, it's difficult admittedly to ride the tiger in a way, and to realize that that's exactly that difficulty that will make your work better. At least it was my case. I was lucky, but you cannot succeed without luck in anything. Reason for which, at the end of the day, it always gets down to whether you're able to exploit that luck, that fortune. And I encourage you heartily to do so. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And as always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.